The screaming stopped when they cut out Martinez's tongue. Sergeant Jake Morrison watched helplessly from the wooden cage as his best friend's body became the main course for 30 blood-painted cannibals dancing around the fire. The smell of burning human flesh filled the Amazon air, while tribal drums pounded like a heartbeat from hell. That was March 15th, 1988. Today, 7 years later, Morrison stands at the edge of the same jungle with a very different mission. This time, he's not the prey. He's the hunter. Before we dive into this story of survival and vengeance, hit subscribe to help uncover the military stories they tried to bury in the jungle and make sure no American hero stays forgotten. But how did one Green Beret survive what killed 6 elite soldiers? How did he spend 7 years preparing for revenge? And what happened when he finally returned to balance the scales? The answers will shock you. 5 days before Martinez became a cannibal feast, Alpha Team had been America's most elite fighting unit. 7 Green Berets, hand-picked for Operation Blood River, a classified mission to eliminate a Soviet weapons cache reportedly hidden deep in the Amazon rainforest. Intelligence suggested the Russians were arming leftist guerrillas with advanced weaponry that could destabilize the entire region. Sergeant Jake Morrison, 28, team leader from Montana, had served 3 tours and earned a Silver Star in Grenada. His men were the best America had to offer. Martinez, the communications expert who could crack any enemy code. Thompson, the demolitions specialist who could level a building with household items. Rodriguez, the medic who'd saved more lives than any field surgeon. Patterson, the sniper who'd never missed a kill shot. Williams, the jungle warfare expert who could survive for months on nothing but rainwater and insects. And Collins, the youngest at 22, but already a legend for his hand-to-hand combat skills. Remember, gentlemen, Morrison had told his squad as their helicopter approached the drop zone, we're not just soldiers today. We're America's sword in the darkness. These Soviet weapons could kill American boys for decades if we don't stop them here. The mission should have taken 72 hours. Get in, destroy the cache, get out. Clean and simple. But nothing about the Amazon was ever simple. March 12, 1988, day 3 of the operation. Morrison's team had been tracking Soviet supply routes through the dense jungle when Williams, walking point, suddenly raised his fist, the silent signal for enemy contact. But these weren't Soviet advisors or leftist guerrillas. These weren't even soldiers. "Sarge," Williams whispered into his radio, "I've got indigenous contacts, approximately 30, all armed with traditional weapons. They're wearing war paint." Morrison's blood went cold. Intelligence briefings had mentioned isolated tribal groups, but they were supposed to be peaceful, avoiding contact with outsiders. These warriors looked anything but peaceful. The attack came without warning. Poison-tipped arrows whistled through the jungle canopy like deadly rain. Rodriguez went down first, an arrow through his neck, his medical training useless against the toxin coursing through his veins. He looked up at Morrison with eyes that said, "Tell my wife I died for something that mattered," before the poison stopped his heart. Thompson tried to reach for his explosives, but the paralytic poison was faster. Patterson got off 2 sniper shots before the arrows found him. Each man died not as a warrior in glorious combat, but helpless, poisoned, watching their brothers fall around them. Morrison and Martinez had managed to reach a defensive position behind fallen logs, but they were surrounded. Dozens of painted warriors emerged from the jungle like ghosts, their faces decorated with patterns that Morrison would later learn represented death and consumption. "Morrison," Martinez gasped, an arrow in his shoulder, "my radio's dead." No extraction coming. That's when Morrison realized the horrible truth. This wasn't a random encounter. The tribe had been hunting them, tracking them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They'd done this before. When Morrison woke up, he was bound hand and foot in a bamboo cage suspended 15 feet above the ground. His uniform had been stripped away, leaving only his dog tags, the metal rectangles that bore his name, blood type, and the promise that America would never forget him. But America wouldn't be looking for them. The mission was classified. Officially, Alpha Team didn't exist. Martinez hung in a cage beside him, barely conscious from blood loss and poison. Through the bamboo bars, Morrison could see their other 4 teammates arranged around a massive fire pit like sacrificial offerings. They were still alive, but barely. The poison kept them paralyzed but aware, forced to watch their own approaching fate. The tribal chief, a scarred man Morrison would later know as Yaku, approached the cages with ceremonial calm. He spoke in broken English learned from previous captured soldiers. "You American warriors," Yaku said, holding up Rodriguez's medical insignia. "Good meat. Make tribes strong." Morrison's military training had prepared him for enemy interrogation, for torture, for psychological warfare. But nothing had prepared him for watching his brothers become the main course at a cannibal feast. This wasn't war. This was hell wearing war paint. They started with Rodriguez, the medic who'd saved 17 soldiers in 3 combat zones. Morrison watched helplessly as the cannibals performed their ritual, chanting in their ancient language, while Rodriguez, still paralyzed but conscious, could only stare in horror. Tell my Maria I was thinking of her," Rodriguez whispered to Morrison just before they carried him to the fire. Morrison squeezed his eyes shut, but he couldn't block out the sounds. The chanting, the screaming, the sickening smell of cooking human flesh. When he opened his eyes again, there was nothing left of Rodriguez but bones that would never make it home to his family's burial plot in San Antonio. How do you tell a man's wife that her husband died defending freedom when all that's left of him are charred bones in an Amazon cooking fire? How do you explain to his 3 children that Daddy won't be coming home because he became dinner for savages? Martinez gripped the bamboo bars until his knuckles went white. "Jake," he whispered, using Morrison's first name for the first time in 2 years of service together. "Promise me something." "Anything, brother. If you get out of here, when you get out of here, you make these bastards pay. You make them pay for all of us." They took Thompson next. The explosives expert who could calculate blast patterns in his sleep, who'd saved Morrison's life in Grenada by clearing a minefield under enemy fire. As they dragged him toward the fire, Thompson looked up at Morrison with eyes that held no fear, only fury. "Semper Fi, Sarge," Thompson called out, using the Marine motto even though they were all army. "Send these savages to hell for me." The ritual took longer this time. The cannibals had learned that terror was a seasoning that made the meat taste better. They made Thompson watch as they prepared the fire, as they sharpened their bone knives, as they painted ceremonial symbols on their faces with the blood of his fallen comrades. Morrison forced himself to watch. He memorized every face, every ritual mark, every chant. If Martinez was right, if he somehow survived this nightmare, he would need to remember everything. These monsters had to pay for what they were doing to America's finest. Patterson lasted 3 days in agony before they finally finished him. The sniper who'd never missed a shot, who'd protected Morrison's team through countless firefights, died calling for his mother. Not for America, not for honor, not for duty. For his mother back in Ohio, who would spend the rest of her life wondering what happened to her boy. Williams, the jungle survival expert who could live off the land for months, died begging them to just get it over with. The warriors made a sport of it, keeping him alive as long as possible while they slowly consumed him piece by piece. Collins, the youngest, held on the longest. At 22, he still believed in miracles. He kept whispering prayers until they cut out his tongue, just like they would later do to Martinez. By the time only Morrison and Martinez remained, they'd been captive for 8 days. 8 days of watching their brothers die in the most horrific way imaginable. 8 days of listening to tribal chants that celebrated each death. 8 days of smelling the smoke from cooking fires that should never have been lit. You know what the worst part is? Martinez whispered one night as they hung in their cages like animals waiting for slaughter. "What's that, Hermano? Our families will never know what happened to us. They'll get visits from officers in dress blues who'll hand them folded flags and tell them we died serving our country. But they'll never know we died screaming in the Amazon, turned into dinner for savages." Morrison stared up at the jungle canopy where stars barely penetrated the green hell that had become their tomb. "They will know," he said quietly, "because I'm going to make it out of here, and when I do, I'm going to come back and paint this jungle red with their blood." Martinez managed a weak smile. How, Jake? We're 15 feet up in bamboo cages, surrounded by 30 cannibals, and no one even knows we're here. Morrison touched his dog tags through the bamboo bars. Because I'm a Green Beret, we don't leave our brothers behind, and when I come back for you, I'm bringing hell with me. March 15th, 1988. The night they came for Martinez. Morrison had been planning his escape for 3 days, using every technique the army had taught him about survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. The cage locks were primitive. The guard rotation had patterns. Most importantly, the cannibals had grown overconfident after 8 days of unopposed feeding. But they were taking Martinez first. As the warriors hauled his best friend toward the ceremonial fire, Martinez caught Morrison's eye one last time. No words were needed. They'd served together, fought together, and now Martinez was about to die so that Morrison might have a chance to live. The screaming started when they tied Martinez to the wooden posts. Morrison used the sound to mask his own movements as he worked the bamboo lock with a piece of sharpened bone he'd been hiding for 2 days. Green Beret training included lockpicking, escape techniques, and improvised weapons, skills that had seemed academic until this moment. The cage door swung open just as they cut out Martinez's tongue. Morrison dropped to the jungle floor like a ghost. 7 years later, he would still hear the sound Martinez made as the bone knife sliced through flesh, still smell the smoke as his brother's body fed the tribal celebration, still feel the rage that burned hotter than any cooking fire as he disappeared into the Amazon darkness. But that night, survival came first. Revenge would have to wait. Morrison spent 17 days moving through the Amazon, using every survival technique Special Forces had beaten into him during training. He ate insects, drank rainwater, and avoided the hunting parties that tracked him like animals. The cannibals knew he'd escaped. They knew he was the only witness to their atrocities. Morrison could hear their search parties moving through the jungle, calling to each other in their tribal language, beating drums to coordinate their hunt. But Morrison had advantages they didn't understand. He'd been trained by the best military had to offer. He knew how to move silently, how to cover his tracks, how to survive in hostile territory behind enemy lines. Most importantly, he had something they didn't have: the burning need to survive so he could return with vengeance. On day 12 of his escape, Morrison found the Soviet weapons cache his team had originally been sent to destroy. Crates of AK-47s, RPGs, and enough ammunition to arm a small army. He memorized the location but didn't touch the weapons. Not yet. When he returned to this jungle, he would need more than Soviet rifles. He would need an army. Morrison reached the extraction coordinates on April 1st, 1988, 17 days after watching Martinez become cannibal cuisine. He was 40 pounds lighter, scarred by jungle thorns, and carrying a rage that would burn for the next 7 years. The helicopter pilot barely recognized the walking skeleton that emerged from the tree line. "Jesus Christ, Sergeant Morrison, where's the rest of your team?" Morrison looked back toward the green hell that had swallowed his brothers. Dead. All of them. Mission accomplished. It wasn't true. The mission had been a complete failure. The Soviet weapons were still there, still arming enemies of America. But Morrison needed the military to believe the mission was over, so they wouldn't send more good soldiers to die in those same cooking fires. He would handle this personally. Morrison retired from active duty in 1992 with full honors and a chest full of medals that felt like lies pinned to his uniform. How could he be a hero when he'd failed to save his brothers? How could he accept recognition when Rodriguez, Thompson, Patterson, Williams, Collins, and Martinez were rotting in unmarked graves in the Amazon? But retirement gave him something the military never could: time to plan. Morrison spent the next 3 decades preparing for his return to the Amazon. He studied tribal languages, learned jungle survival techniques beyond military training, and most importantly, he built a network of contacts throughout South America. Arms dealers, mercenaries, former soldiers looking for one last mission. By 1994, Morrison had assembled a private army of 12 men. All veterans, all with nothing left to lose, all willing to follow a crazy old Green Beret back into the Amazon for one last fight. But Morrison didn't want to just kill the cannibals who'd murdered his team. That would be too quick, too clean. He wanted them to feel the same terror his brothers had felt. He wanted them to understand what it meant to be hunted, to be caged, to watch their loved ones disappear piece by piece. Morrison had learned to think like them, to become something even more dangerous than a cannibal tribe. He had become their nightmare. The jungle hadn't forgotten Jake Morrison. As he stepped off the helicopter into the same Amazon hell that had swallowed his brothers, the trees seemed to whisper their names. Rodriguez, Thompson, Patterson, Williams, Collins, Martinez. Exactly 7 years after Martinez died screaming, Morrison stood at the edge of the Amazon with his private army. 12 hardened veterans armed with the latest military hardware, guided by a man who'd been planning this mission for longer than some of them had been alive. "Listen up," Morrison told his team as they checked their weapons one final time. "We're not here to win hearts and minds. We're not here to spread democracy. We're here to collect a debt that's been accumulating interest for 7 years." The cannibal village hadn't changed much. Same cooking fires, same ceremonial grounds, same bamboo cages hanging 15 feet above the ground like some twisted art installation. But the tribe had grown sloppy over the decades. They hadn't faced real opposition since Morrison's escape, hadn't needed to worry about enemies with modern weapons and military training. That was about to change. Morrison didn't attack immediately. Instead, he spent 2 weeks conducting psychological operations that would have made his old Special Forces instructors proud. The first tribal scout disappeared while hunting alone. His body was found 3 days later, arranged exactly like Rodriguez had been positioned around the cooking fire, but with all the meat cleanly carved away. The bone knife was left behind with Morrison carved into the handle. The second scout vanished during a fishing expedition. This time, Morrison left Thompson's dog tags hung around the bones, along with explosives residue that showed the man had been killed by military ordnance. One by one, Morrison picked off isolated tribesmen using techniques that mirrored their own hunting methods. But instead of eating his kills, he left them as messages. Each body was a reminder that the escaped American soldier had returned, that he remembered everything, and that the debt was finally coming due. The psychological impact was devastating. The tribe that had terrorized lost soldiers for generations suddenly found themselves looking over their shoulders, jumping at shadows, afraid to leave their village after dark. Morrison was using their own superstitions against them. He became the jungle spirit they feared most, the ghost of a warrior who refused to stay dead. After 2 weeks of psychological torture, Morrison and his team moved on the village at 0347 hours on March 29, 1995. Morrison's heart pounded as he crouched in the same jungle where he'd watched his brothers die. 7 years of rage condensed into this single moment of reckoning. "This is for you, Martinez," Morrison whispered as he raised his hand to signal the attack. The assault began with Morrison himself leading the charge toward the ceremonial grounds where his team had been butchered. His suppressed M4 carbine spat death in controlled bursts as tribal sentries dropped silently in their watch positions. These weren't random enemies. These were the same painted faces that had danced around Martinez's burning flesh. A young warrior rushed Morrison with a bone spear, screaming war cries that echoed the same sounds from 1988. Morrison didn't use his rifle. Instead, he drew his combat knife and met the savage hand-to-hand, steel against bone, modern warfare training against primitive fury. The fight lasted 30 seconds. The warrior's spear snapped against Morrison's body armor, while Morrison's blade found the gap between ribs with surgical precision. "That's for Rodriguez, you son of a bitch," Morrison hissed as the warrior collapsed. The village erupted in chaos as 12 elite veterans systematically dismantled 3 decades of cannibal dominance. Night vision goggles turned darkness into daylight advantage, while thermal imaging revealed enemies hiding in traditional camouflage that meant nothing against modern technology. The cannibals' poison arrows bounced harmlessly off Kevlar vests that could stop rifle rounds. But Morrison barely noticed his team's clinical efficiency. His mind was locked on 1988, seeing ghosts of his fallen brothers in every shadow, hearing Martinez's screams in every tribal war cry. When a scarred warrior emerged from the chief's hut, The same man who'd held the bone knife to Thompson's throat. Morrison abandoned his rifle entirely. "Remember me?" Morrison roared, charging with his bare hands. The warrior swung a war club studded with human teeth. Morrison caught the weapon mid-swing, muscles hardened by 7 years of obsessive training easily overpowering the aging cannibal. He ripped the club away and drove his fist into the warrior's painted face with enough force to shatter bone. "This is for Thompson. This is for Patterson. This is for Williams." Each punch was a name, each impact a debt payment 7 years overdue. Morrison's tactical radio crackled. "Village secured, Sergeant. All hostiles down or captured." But Morrison wasn't done. Chief Yaku emerged from the largest hut, now in his 70s, but still wearing the same ceremonial scars Morrison remembered from his nightmares. The old chief held a bone knife, maybe the same one that had carved up American heroes. "You," Yaku said in broken English, recognition dawning in his ancient eyes. "Ghost soldier, you come back." Morrison drew his sidearm, a .45 caliber pistol that could end this 7-year war with a single squeeze of the trigger. His finger tightened on the trigger as every memory crashed back at once. Rodriguez calling for his mother, Martinez's tongue being cut out, Collins dying while still believing in miracles. "I promised them I'd come back," Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "I promised I'd make you pay for what you did to my brothers." Yaku dropped the bone knife, understanding that his reign of terror had finally met something more dangerous than cannibal savagery. An American soldier with nothing left to lose and 7 years to plan his revenge. The entire assault had lasted 11 minutes. When the smoke cleared, Morrison stood in the center of the village where his team had died, surrounded by 16 surviving tribesmen bound with military-grade zip ties. Modern warfare had collided with Stone Age brutality, and there had never been any doubt about the outcome. But as Morrison stared at the cooking fire that had consumed his brothers, he realized that killing these savages would be too quick, too merciful. They needed to understand what real justice looked like. "Remember me?" Morrison asked Yaku in the tribal language he'd spent decades learning. "I was in the cage, the one who got away." Yaku's eyes went wide with recognition and terror. The legend had returned. The ghost warrior who'd haunted their nightmares for 7 years was real, standing in their village with the weapons and skills of the outside world. Morrison didn't torture them. That would have made him no better than they were. Instead, he gave them a choice that was no choice at all. "You're going to dig graves," Morrison told the surviving tribesmen in their own language. 6 graves, properly marked, properly blessed according to your customs. You're going to bury the bones of every American soldier you murdered with the honor they deserved. The cannibals spent 3 days digging graves and gathering the scattered remains of Morrison's brothers. Each bone was treated with the respect due to fallen American heroes, not the casual disposal they'd received 7 years earlier. When the burial ceremony was complete, Morrison placed American flags on each grave and spoke words that should have been said decades earlier. "Rodriguez, Thompson, Patterson, Williams, Collins, Martinez, your mission is complete. Your service to America is honored. Your sacrifice will never be forgotten. You're coming home now, brothers." With his brothers finally laid to rest, Morrison faced the surviving cannibals one last time. Chief Yaku and 16 warriors who had participated in the murders of American soldiers. "You have 2 choices," Morrison told them. "Option 1, you come with me to face American military justice for the murder of United States soldiers. Option 2, you take your own punishment according to your tribal laws." Morrison placed a single bone knife in the center of the circle, the same type of blade they'd used to butcher his team. The choice was simple. Face decades in American military prison, or die by the same methods they'd used on their victims. Yaku looked at the knife, then at Morrison, then back at the graves of the American soldiers. For the first time in 7 years, he understood what real justice looked like. "We choose honor," Yaku said in broken English. Morrison returned to the United States in April 1995 with the remains of his brothers and video evidence of their burial ceremony. The Pentagon quietly reopened the case of Operation Blood River, officially acknowledging the deaths of 6 Green Berets who had died serving their country in classified operations. Rodriguez was buried in San Antonio with full military honors. His widow, now remarried with grown children, finally learned what happened to the husband who'd disappeared 7 years earlier. Thompson was laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery. His sister attended the ceremony, carrying the same explosives manual he'd studied as a young soldier. Patterson, Williams, Collins and Martinez all received proper military funerals with 21 gun salutes and folded flags presented to families who'd waited 7 years for closure. Morrison attended each funeral, standing at attention as taps played over the graves of the brothers he'd failed to save in 1988, but finally brought home in 1995. The classified after-action report on Operation Blood River contained a single recommendation. Sergeant Jake Morrison's actions in the Amazon demonstrated the highest ideals of military service, that no American soldier is ever truly lost as long as one brother remains to bring them home. Morrison now lives quietly in Montana, his mission finally complete. But sometimes on quiet nights he swears he can still hear Martinez's voice on the wind, saying what all soldiers say when a mission ends successfully: "Good job, brother. Good job bringing us home." The Amazon jungle keeps its secrets well, but some bonds are stronger than death. Some promises are kept no matter how long it takes. And some debts can only be paid in full when justice finally finds its way through the green hell to honor the fallen and bring the warriors home. What would you have done in Morrison's situation? Could you have survived 7 years knowing your brother's killers were still out there, or would you have tried to get revenge sooner? And here's what really haunts me about this story. Morrison kept his promise to Martinez, but at what cost? He spent 7 years consumed by revenge instead of living his life. Was justice worth sacrificing everything? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to keep a promise that seemed impossible? What do you think about Morrison's methods? Was he a hero getting justice for his fallen brothers? Or did he become something darker in his quest for revenge? And for our veterans watching, thank you for your service. Stories like Morrison's remind us that the bonds forged in combat never break, even when everything else falls apart. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear about the unbreakable brotherhood of America's warriors. These stories of sacrifice and loyalty deserve to be told, and your support helps us bring more forgotten heroes to light. Drop a comment below. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know what you think about Morrison's 7-year journey from victim to avenger. Did he do the right thing?